Now, despite an economic slowdown across much of Europe, in Greece, the government is forecasting 5.6% growth in 2022, with a comeback for tourism and strong domestic consumption both playing their part. Foreign investors have also taken note, with foreign direct investment, or FDI, flows hitting $5 billion last year. Yet with an energy crisis raging, an uncertain global picture and an election for Greece on the horizon, the question is, can the growth be maintained? Athens has been flying the flag here in New York, where it's been promoting itself as an investment opportunity. Yianos Kontopoulos is the CEO of Athens Group, the parent company of the Greek Stock Exchange. Yianos, fantastic to have you with us. You're back in Greece now. We were going to have this conversation last week when you were in New York, so just to let our viewers know this, it's clear, I think, that Greece has been incredibly resilient this year in the face of huge challenges. The big question is, what's been your message to potential investors and to those outside Greece about what the next 12 months brings?
Well, look, Julia, it's one of those weird global cycles, as you mentioned before. And in these types of environments, you want to find the idiosyncratic story. And Greece is certainly one. It's coming back out of a very difficult period that lasted for a long time. But over the last few years, it has been staging that recovery despite the additional problems that we've had. So the main message is, this is the time. There are plenty of opportunities, and we want to present them to the outside world.
And what questions have you been getting from investors? Because as much as you can send the message, it's always what they respond with that's fascinating to me as well. So what have been the common questions, whether you've been in New York or over in Europe? Because I know you've also been meeting potential investors and just talking about the Greek story there too.
Well, I'll start with a weird one, in the sense that the question that we didn't get, we had a side meeting in London about 10 days ago with the Prime Minister, with some of the largest international investors. And there were about 20 of them in the room. None of them asked them in an hour about elections. That was the first meeting. But leaving that aside, I think that was interesting. I'm not saying the question didn't come up, but I was stunned that it didn't come up in that particular meeting. Then on the other front, I think what's interesting, what I found interesting, is that there were very distinct questions about the source of funding. In terms of investment sources that are coming, whether they're coming from Saudi Arabia or China or the US. It was those type of questions and the willingness of the Greek government to consider a specific project. So I think it's not a question of if, it's a question of who.
That's a fascinating point to make. If I sort of had to make a guess, I would say perhaps some concern about potential future Chinese investment. Can I ask what the response was? And I appreciate you're not a member of the government and you're not part of the cabinet, but obviously you are in charge of the broader group that covers the stock exchanges.
Sure.
Because whether it's an investment in private companies or public companies there, it's an interesting question at this moment in time.
Look, my sense is that the answer that was given in a very pointed question in that particular direction was that I don't think there's any particular expectation, any particular plan to source these types of funds from China, or in particular program in the works. If anything, I was surprised to see actually that Prime Minister, I think, mentioned that there are some nearshoring type of activities generally available for Europe that are originating from China, and that Greece is particularly open to them. So again, maybe the reverse was the interesting aspect here too.
Yeah, it's almost what you're not asked versus what the truth is, which is quite fascinating.
Exactly.
What about in terms of your role as well? Because I know we saw foreign capital leave, and as you said, it's interesting even at this point in time that political stability is seen rather than fear of instability. But when I look at the Athens Exchange itself, there's still a significant weighting in the banks, utilities and energy. And I think perhaps the obvious question for those even looking on an index level is non-performing loans, which has been an issue in the past. Is there risk still of action with the banks, or even things that other European countries have been talking about and in certain cases acted upon, which is a windfall tax on energy companies? What can you tell me about those concerns?
Well, again, let me emphasize almost the opposite surprise here. I mean, I think if we held this event even last year, we would be getting the question marks about banks and the level of NPLs. Instead, we actually got a question about a windfall tax on the banks. Forget about the energy companies, which means what? That the banks have had an exceptional year. And so the momentum have been building since 21 in terms of profitability. They had a very, very successful year in 2022 so far. Deposits are actually growing still in the system, which you would think that they would be a problem because of the energy shock and how's that hitting the average consumer in Greece. Apparently, it hasn't hit the average consumer, or at least the aggregate. So it's for me, it's actually very revealing, the fact that that question came up. By the way, that answer was very definitive. It was that there was no consideration for a windfall tax on banks. On the other hand, on the energy side, Greece was, if I recall well, one of the first countries to impose a windfall tax, and then the rest of Europe actually followed through. But I don't think there was no intention to kind of accentuate this. So I think it's going to remain steady as long as there are excess profits of that sort. So the net news there, I think, is stability.
Yes, what's there will remain, because it's certainly one of the things that I heard simply from the willingness of the government to take action in the first place. I think one of the other things is building out the representation on the stock exchange and perhaps new listings or dual listings. What's the prospect for getting fresh listings and companies to come to Greece, whether it's a primary listing or even a secondary listing for those that operate internationally? Talk to me about that prospect.
Sure.
Yes, and you sigh before you answer. It's a challenge.
Yes, well, this is my personal challenge.
Of
but
course.
Look, I'm very optimistic, primarily because I think we're getting a very good signal, first from the government, because they have been privatizing a lot of assets over time, but they haven't privatized something recently via the stock exchange. And it appears that they will be actually privatizing a top jewel asset, the Athens International Airport, sometime next year, and most likely, we don't know yet for sure, it might happen via the Athens Stock Exchange. And it's a large enough item that I think will prompt other companies to follow through. So that's aspect number one. The other one, I think, where, as you alluded to, is the different type of representation that we want of different sectors of the economy. If you were to look, for example, one that's unexpected is technology. The depth of the technological development since in the midst of the crisis has been tremendous. Greeks have become a lot more entrepreneurial, I think, as a result of the crisis, and a lot of them are the young Greeks, which have been putting money and effort into technology. As a result, we've had a couple of unicorns already coming up, and I think some of them are slated to come to the stock exchange. Now, if it's a big ticket item and it's technology, you're likely to end up somewhere in the US initially. So we need to be imaginative on how we attract them back here. And I think the way around it, and something that's consistent with our plans, is the dual listing. Greece and Europe has to offer actually insurance to those technology companies, which are still in the initial stages, however successful they've been so far. At least both, and have the US audience, but at the other hand, have also the Greek and the European audience, giving them a completely different source of funds, and navigating through a very, I would say, challenging cycle for technology anyway. But technology is a big factor. And the other one that we aim for is shipping. Yeah,
which makes perfect sense. I was going to say, though, a dual listing is vitally important if you've got a homegrown unicorn that's perhaps attracted to the United States because it can get later stage funding, but then looks to list. If you can encourage them to even do a dual listing or think about Greece, it's vitally important for many reasons, I think, but also to show some support for the home nation, particularly if the business environment is supportive. Thank you so much for your time today. The one thing we also should talk about in terms of the prospect for Greece, and it's very clear behind you, is the relative weather, I think, in Greece relative to the rest of it. Just look at that. We have blue skies behind you. We certainly don't have that here today.
17 degrees.
I know,
yes,
Sean.
Exactly.
Yes. Yianos, great to have you with us. Thank you so much. Come back to talk to us soon. Yianos Kontopoulos, the CEO of the Athens Group. We'll speak again soon.